Ethan sat at the dining table, his fingers loosely wrapped around the handle of his coffee mug, staring at the smooth, untouched surface of his drink. The steam curled into the air, dissipating like the trust he once had in Mia. "She's working on herself," he muttered under his breath, the phrase tasting bitter now. For months, Mia had insisted that she needed time for self-reflection, that she was attending therapy, signing up for personal growth seminars, anything to better herself. And Ethan, ever the supportive husband, had nodded along, encouraged her, even offered to drive her when she seemed too exhausted from these supposed breakthroughs. But something gnawed at him. Mia never spoke about what she was working through. Whenever he asked, she'd wave him off with a vague, "Just a lot of deep stuff, you know," and change the subject. There were no self-help books on their shelves, no worksheets from her sessions, no sudden revelations about past traumas, just more distance between them. At first, he told himself he was being paranoid, that people had different ways of processing, but when she started dressing differently, more effort put into her appearance, subtle changes in perfume, new outfits, he started to feel the walls closing in. The breaking point came when he tried to do something thoughtful. He had called her clinic, wanting to surprise her with a small gesture, a note waiting for her after her session, maybe a bouquet of flowers. But the receptionist had hesitated at his inquiry. "Sir, are you sure you have the right name?" "Yes, Mia Dawson. She has an appointment today." Silence. Then a rustling of papers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dawson, but we don't have a Mia Dawson scheduled for today or for any day this month." His fingers had tightened around his phone, his heartbeat thudding against his ribs. "You're sure?" he pressed. The receptionist's voice softened. "Yes, sir." Maybe she sees someone privately? Maybe. But Ethan knew better. That evening, when Mia came home, he watched her closely. She kissed his cheek absent-mindedly, set her purse down, and slipped off her heels. "How was your session?" he asked casually. She blinked, then smiled. "Oh, good. Tough, but, necessary." A blatant lie. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat, keeping his face neutral. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he made a plan. The next morning, while she got ready for another session, he pretended to leave for work as usual, but instead of heading to the office, he parked a block away and waited. When Mia finally left, Ethan followed her. She didn't drive to the clinic, she drove to a secluded park, and when she stepped out of the car, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't alone. Sitting on a bench, waiting for her, was Nathan. Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel as he watched Mia approach the man on the park bench. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. Nathan, her so-called mentor, the man she claimed was just helping her through her self-reflection journey, was already seated, his body turned toward her in anticipation. Ethan stayed in his car, parked far enough away that they wouldn't immediately notice him, but close enough to observe every movement. The air inside felt suffocating, thick with the weight of realization. He had spent months believing Mia's words, giving her space, trusting that she was working on herself. And now, in a single moment, that trust shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Mia reached Nathan, and the way she smiled at him made Ethan's stomach turn. It wasn't the polite, casual smile of a woman greeting a mentor. It was warm, intimate, an expression Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. She sat down beside Nathan, closer than necessary, her knees almost brushing against his. Nathan leaned in, speaking in a low tone, his fingers grazing the back of her hand before she tilted her head back and laughed at something he said. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. His breath came in slow, controlled inhales, though the rage beneath his skin threatened to explode. He wasn't the type to act impulsively, to storm over and cause a scene. No, he needed clarity, needed to see exactly what kind of betrayal he was dealing with. He reached for his phone, activating the camera, zooming in just enough to capture their interaction without being obvious. As he recorded, Mia reached for Nathan's arm, squeezing it gently as if reassuring him. Ethan had seen that gesture before, on nights when he had been stressed, when work had weighed heavily on his shoulders. It was the way she used to comfort him. Nathan turned slightly, angling his body toward her, and Mia mirrored the movement unconsciously. The way they sat, heads close together, bodies angled inward, was the kind of unspoken language that told Ethan everything he needed to know. They weren't discussing personal growth or therapy. They were something more. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to consider the possibility that he was overreacting. Maybe they were just close friends. Maybe Mia truly was struggling and Nathan had become someone she could confide in. But then, as if to confirm his worst fears, Nathan reached up and tucked a loose strand of Mia's hair behind her ear. Ethan felt his vision blur with a mix of fury and heartbreak. That simple, intimate act sealed it. That wasn't something a mentor did. That wasn't something a platonic friend did. That was something Ethan used to do. That was something a man did when he saw a woman as his. Mia didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She let it happen. Ethan's chest tightened as he lowered his phone. He had seen enough. Sitting in his car, he realized he had two choices. He could walk away now, pretending he never saw any of this, burying the truth beneath denial, or he could face it head-on. There was never really a choice. Ethan pushed open his car door, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air. His footsteps were steady as he crossed the distance toward them. Neither Mia nor Nathan noticed him at first, too wrapped up in whatever whispered words they were sharing. It wasn't until he was just a few feet away that Mia finally looked up, and the color drained from her face. "Ethan," she said, her voice faltering as she straightened in her seat. Nathan turned as well, his expression shifting from relaxed to guarded. Ethan didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of his presence. Mia's hands instinctively folded in her lap, her fingers twisting together, a nervous habit he knew too well. Nathan, on the other hand, cleared his throat, forcing a small, confident smile. "Ethan, this is unexpected," he said, as if he hadn't just been caught in an intimate moment with another man's wife. Ethan ignored him, his gaze locked onto Mia's. "So," he said, his voice calm, measured, "this is what self-reflection looks like?" Mia's lips parted, but no words came out. She blinked rapidly, scrambling for an explanation. It's not what it looks like," she finally managed. Ethan let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "No? Then why don't you tell me what it is, Mia? Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell doesn't look like therapy." Nathan shifted in his seat, exhaling through his nose. "Ethan, I think we should all just take a breath and talk like adults." Ethan turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Talk? Sure, let's talk. Maybe you can explain why my wife has been lying to me for months." Mia's face crumpled, a mix of guilt and panic flashing across her features. "I didn't." "Ethan, it's not like that," she insisted. "Then tell me what it is," he said, his voice steel-edged. "Tell me why you're here, why you lied about therapy, why you thought I wouldn't find out." Mia swallowed hard, glancing at Nathan as if looking for support. He hesitated before turning his attention back to Ethan, choosing his words carefully. "Mia's been struggling," he said smoothly. "She needed someone to talk to. Someone who understands, someone who isn't her husband." Ethan finished for him, his voice sharp. Mia looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Ethan, Save it," he interrupted. "I just wanted to hear you say it to my face. Now I know." Without another word, Ethan turned on his heel and walked away, leaving them sitting there in the park, caught in the wreckage of their own making. Ethan walked away from the park, his footsteps heavy, his mind a battlefield of emotions. His chest burned with a mix of fury and heartbreak, but his face remained unreadable. He had seen everything he needed to see, heard enough lies to know the truth. There was no salvaging this. Mia had betrayed him, not just with her actions, but with the months of deception, the carefully constructed web of half-truths and outright lies. As he reached his car, he gripped the door handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. A part of him wanted to turn back, to confront them further, to demand more answers. But what more was there to say? He had all the proof he needed. The images were burned into his mind. Mia sitting close to Nathan, the way she had smiled at him, the way he had touched her hair. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to let go of the car door handle. He had to think. He couldn't afford to act impulsively, to let his anger dictate his next move. This wasn't just about confrontation. This was about reclaiming control, about making sure Mia understood the full weight of her actions. He pulled out his phone, staring at the recording he had taken. The video played on his screen, and for a brief second he allowed himself to feel the raw pain of betrayal. It was different seeing it through the lens of his phone, colder, more undeniable. This wasn't paranoia, this wasn't overthinking. This was real. Ethan knew he couldn't keep this to himself. Mia had built her lie carefully, made herself the sympathetic figure, the wife on a journey of self-discovery, the woman who just needed space to work on herself. She had made him the trusting fool. But now, Ethan held the truth in the palm of his hand, and he would not let her rewrite this narrative. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Instead of driving home, he drove to his best friend Mark's house. Mark had always been the one person Ethan could rely on, the one who had warned him months ago that Mia's behavior didn't add up. Ethan had brushed off those concerns back then, unwilling to believe his wife could be anything less than honest. Now he wished he had listened sooner. When Mark opened the door, his expression shifted instantly from casual to serious. "What happened?" he asked, stepping aside so Ethan could walk in. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just handed Mark his phone and played the video. Mark's jaw tightened as he watched. "Jesus," he muttered. "She's been lying to you this whole time?" Ethan nodded, lowering himself onto the couch. "She made me believe she was going to therapy, Mark, that she was working on herself, all while she was meeting him." Mark shook his head in disgust. "That's low, and you know what's worse? She probably would have kept this going if you hadn't caught her." Ethan clenched his fists. "I'm not letting her get away with this." Mark sat down across from him. "What's your plan?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to beg for explanations. I'm going to expose the truth. To our friends, our family, everyone she's lied to." Mark smirked. "Damn right you are. She wants to pretend she's the wounded wife going on some spiritual journey. Let's see how enlightened she feels when the truth is out in the open." They spent the next hour strategizing. Ethan would confront Mia again, but this time in front of people who mattered. Her parents, their closest friends, and even some of their mutual colleagues. He wasn't going to let her twist the story into something that painted her as the victim. When Ethan finally drove home, it was already evening. The house was quiet when he walked in, but he could hear Mia in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner. The normalcy of it made his blood boil. How could she act so carefree after everything? He set his keys down and walked into the kitchen. Mia turned, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Hey," she greeted, wiping her hands on a towel. "You're home earlier than I expected." Ethan studied her for a long moment. She had no idea what was coming. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. Mia's smile faltered. "Okay," she said cautiously. "What's wrong?" Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and played the video. The moment she saw herself on the screen, sitting beside Nathan, her entire body tensed. The color drained from her face. "I followed you," Ethan said flatly. "I went to your therapy session. Turns out, your therapist is a guy named Nathan." Mia's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Go ahead," Ethan continued, crossing his arms. "Explain this. Tell me again how you were working on yourself. I'd love to hear the new version of your story." Mia swallowed hard, her hands gripping the kitchen counter as if steadying herself. "Ethan, Save it," he interrupted. "You had plenty of chances to tell me the truth. You chose to lie instead." Mia's breath came faster, panic creeping into her expression. "I never meant to hurt you." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the thing, Mia. You didn't just hurt me, you insulted me. You thought I was too blind, too trusting, too stupid to notice. And the worst part? You didn't even have the decency to come clean." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Ethan, please," he cut her off again. "You don't get to beg for understanding now. The people in our lives deserve to know who you really are, and trust me, they're going to." Mia's breath hitched. "You wouldn't." "I already have," Ethan said coldly. "I sent the video to Mark, to my sister, to your parents. I'm done protecting you." Mia's face crumpled in horror, but Ethan felt no sympathy. "I hope he was worth it," he said before turning away. "Because this is what self-reflection really looks like." And with that, Ethan walked out, leaving Mia standing in the wreckage of her own choices. Ethan walked away from the kitchen, his mind a storm of emotions, but his steps were steady. He had expected Mia to cry, to beg, to try and manipulate her way out of this the way she had always done when things didn't go her way. But for the first time, her tears didn't shake him. Her excuses didn't soften his resolve. As he made his way upstairs, he could hear her following him. "Ethan, please," she called, her voice cracking. "We need to talk about this." He stopped at the doorway to their bedroom, turning to face her. "Talk?" he echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. "You mean like how you talked to Nathan? How you sat there with him, whispering, laughing, touching? Tell me, Mia, what exactly is left to say?" Mia's breath was unsteady, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "It wasn't what you think," she said weakly. "It's not—" "Don't," Ethan cut in sharply, his patience snapping. "Don't insult me with more lies. I saw it with my own eyes. I recorded it. Hell, I have more proof of your self-reflection than you do." Mia's face crumpled and she let out a shaky exhale. "I was confused, Ethan," she whispered. "I've been feeling lost, and Nathan, he listened to me. He made me feel understood." Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. "Of course he did. That's what manipulators do. They pretend to be your safe place while they chip away at everything real in your life. And you let him?" Mia's lips trembled. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "That's the problem, Mia," Ethan said coldly. "It did happen, and you let it go on for months. Every time you looked me in the eye and told me you were going to therapy, every time you kissed me goodbye before sneaking off to see him, you made a choice. Over and over again." Mia shook her head, her hands clasped together as if she were trying to hold herself together. "I don't want to lose you, Ethan," she whispered. Ethan studied her for a long moment. This woman, the one standing in front of him with tears streaking down her face, was not the woman he had married. Or maybe she was, and he had just been blind to it for years. "You lost me the moment you lied," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And there's no coming back from that." Mia's shoulders slumped, the weight of her choices finally crushing her. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm filing for divorce." The words hit the air like a gunshot, and Mia physically flinched. "No," she gasped, stepping forward. "Ethan, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You had your chance, Mia. You had every opportunity to be honest, to work on us. Instead, you chose him. And now you have to live with that." Mia's eyes darted around the room, desperation sinking in. "What about everything we built?" she pleaded. "Our life, our memories. You're just going to throw it all away?" Ethan let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You already threw it away," he said. "I'm just making it official." For the first time, anger flickered in Mia's expression. "So that's it?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You're just walking away, just like that?" Ethan tilted his head, considering her words. "Walking away," he repeated. "Mia, I held on for months while you lied to my face. I ignored the warning signs. I convinced myself I was being paranoid when deep down I knew something was wrong. I gave you more chances than you deserved. So no, I'm not just walking away. I'm finally choosing myself." Mia's breathing was uneven now, her face red with frustration. "You're being cruel," she accused. "I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we have to throw everything away." Ethan's lips curled into a humorous smile. "A mistake?" he repeated. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something hurtful in the heat of an argument. But sneaking around, lying to your husband, choosing another man over and over again, that's not a mistake. That's a choice." Mia's chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled to find something, anything, that could make him stay. But there was nothing left to say. Ethan turned and opened the closet, grabbing a suitcase and tossing it onto the bed. "I'll be staying at Mark's until we get everything sorted," he said flatly, unzipping the bag. "I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork." Mia took a step forward, but something in his demeanor made her hesitate. "Ethan, please," she whispered one last time. He didn't look at her as he grabbed a handful of clothes and shoved them into the suitcase. "You can beg all you want, Mia," he said, his tone steady. "But you weren't begging for me when you were sitting on that bench with him, and I refuse to be someone's second choice." Mia let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand, but Ethan didn't stop packing. He had spent too long giving her his time, his energy, his love, only for her to spit on it. By the time he zipped up the suitcase, he felt lighter. Not happy, not healed, but lighter, as if the weight of her betrayal was finally slipping off his shoulders. Ethan turned to face her one last time, and in her eyes he saw it, the realization that she had lost him for good. Without another word, he grabbed his suitcase, walked past her, and left. Ethan stepped out of the house, the night air cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of emotions burning inside him. The weight on his chest that had been suffocating him for weeks, months even, had finally begun to lift. He had walked out, not in anger, not in a fit of rage, but with a quiet, final certainty. The moment he closed that door behind him, he knew there was no turning back. As he walked toward his car, he expected to hear Mia calling his name again, running after him, pleading one last time, but there was only silence. Maybe she had finally realized there was nothing left to say. Ethan placed his suitcase in the trunk and slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the house he had once called home. The porch light cast a warm glow against the brick exterior, the same porch where they had stood years ago, laughing and drinking wine on summer evenings, the same home they had decorated together, built a life in. It was all a lie now. He exhaled sharply and started the engine, pulling away from the driveway without another glance in the rearview mirror. He wasn't going to dwell on what was behind him anymore. By the time he arrived at Mark's house, his best friend was already waiting at the door. The second Ethan stepped inside, Mark handed him a glass of whiskey without a word. Ethan took it, sinking into the couch with a tired sigh. "So?" Mark said, sitting across from him. "It's done?" Ethan nodded, taking a slow sip. "It's done. I walked out, told her I'm filing for divorce." Mark let out a low whistle. "Damn. How did she take it?" Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "She begged at first, tried to act like it was all a mistake, but when she realized I wasn't budging, she got angry. Like I was the one ruining everything." Mark shook his head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. She cheats, lies for months, and still tries to spin it like you're the bad guy." Ethan chuckled bitterly. Classic Mia. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night settling over them. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. There would be legal battles, awkward conversations with mutual friends, and the inevitable whispers of gossip. But at least now he was free of the worst part, the deception. Mark studied him for a moment. "Sir, how do you feel?" Ethan considered the question. He should have felt broken, devastated, maybe even regretful. But strangely, he felt something else entirely. "Lighter," he admitted, "like I finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to hold on to." Mark nodded approvingly. "Good, because you deserve better, man." Ethan stared at his drink, swirling the amber liquid absently. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I do." The realization settled over him like a slow sunrise, warming, steady, undeniable. For the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't someone's backup plan. He wasn't clinging to a love that had already rotted beneath the surface. He was free, and that was all he needed.